4 was on the far side. Our sun was relatively quiet. It's now rotated back around and been reassigned as 3697. Even though it's degraded quite a bit, 3697 has given us several strong flares, a minor solar storm, and an M9.7 yesterday that released a strong, likely Earth-directed CME, touched the S3 solar radiation levels, which are the strongest since 2017. The Earth-directed component of the CME is expected to arrive between Sunday and Monday night, bringing our KP index between 4 and 7, and likely a good aurora show for our neighbors in the northern US. I'd like to leave you with this image showing yesterday's M9.7 eruption and resulting radiation storm. And then how do I play? Okay.
There you go.
Okay, sweet.
That's awesome.
Okay. Okay, I know I'm kind of all over the place, but
Okay,
oh.
so basically, whoever's speaking gets this mic.
How are you? Good. How are you?
Here.
Okay, good deal. And then we'll just go ahead and get started then. Let's see.
It worked for you, but you put it all the way down. Somehow when I do that, I didn't get it all the way down.
You're with my son. I just let him.
Let's see.
Oh,
This
sorry.
one? And then it's fine. Just click this and then we'll be good.
Yep.
Golden.
And I think we're all set. Screen is shared. No, I didn't hit anything special on
Oh, we got some chats. Let's see what it says.
Seems like it did it.
Okay. Well, thank you. Good to see you. Well, I'll go and get started then. We have a full meeting and it's right at 2. Well, anyway, and we got people online also. So thank you all for coming to the June North Houston Space Society meeting. So today we have a full agenda. Oops, it helps if you, nope, this is the right one. Let's see. There we go, got it. And then I'll get rid of this one to avoid. But yeah. Anyway, I had a few opening remarks I thought I'd make, and then we'll get the latest in space news by Patricia. So really excited to hear that, especially after last night's event. I was on console last night supporting ISS, and the radiation group came on, and so there's a solar event happening, and no impacts to the station I'm aware of, but still, I hadn't heard that before, so I thought that was interesting. So we had our Comic Palooza booth, and there you were able to take a picture on the moon, win a SpaceX Starship model. You could send a postcard to space. I get a space sticker, pick up a copy of Ad Astra, and we had lots of people come. We had people dressed up as all sorts of things. Alien versus astronaut down there. Elvis apparently is still alive. Uh, kids are excited about the moon. And saw this guy walking by. He had a shirt that said "not flat," so it's like, we got to get a picture of you with the Earth. And then we had the little starship, space rocket that people could take a picture with. And we even had this guy who was being carried around by an alien, but luckily there was some men in black here to kind of help him out, so that kind of worked out. Mark Twain, Captain America, and the entire Mario family. And then, of course, the more comical ones. I especially like this one where you have Pac-Man eating the Earth. I thought that was kind of cute. And these people were in character. They were like, bubble, bubble, however they talk. I can't reproduce it, but they were really, really clever. I tried talking back. Kids were excited and coming. And then we gave away a lot of Starship models. So and that was really fun to do, especially considering after Thursday's flight test of Starship. And it was just really neat to see everybody engage the public and see how that worked out. And so that was exciting. And then, of course, Patricia made her planets. That was awesome. You can see the Earth up here is crocheted. Let's see, and then that's Jupiter with its spot, and Saturn, and that was a big hit as well. So, and then we had lots of people interacting with the public. It's pretty exciting. And I just want to thank all the people that volunteered last week. So that was really quite remarkable. With that, I should point out that our backdrop is this famous Earthrise photo, which was a picture that was taken by astronaut Bill Anders in Apollo 8. And yesterday we had some sad news. Bill Anders actually died in a plane accident at the age of 90. It's really amazing that he was able to gift us with this picture, which really shows that the Earth is really a part of the heavens, and it's really a special place, and that's our little spaceship in space. It's our natural spaceship. So anyway, really unfortunate timing, but it was and with that, I think we'll go with the latest space news. So let's pull that up. Let's see. Tab. Okay, there we go. And then space news right there. And I could just give you this one. And then we'll go all the way back to the beginning. And hopefully this works. Okay, good. So, and then I can give you this. And then
Okay.
Excellent.
Hi, everybody. Okay, I have a presentation. I have a short space weather presentation. Okay, last time we were together, we were experiencing the 7th largest solar storm recorded since 1957, according to Space Weather Live. While not as powerful as the Carrington event, our sun launched many significant flares at our planet from sunspot region 3664. Although we did not see emergency level power grid and communication impacts, there were many reports of specific system impacts, most notably John Deere GPS systems, which became inaccurate during planting. Many across the planet were treated to an aurora show seen as far south as the Texas Renaissance Festival, my picture, and Mexicali, Mexico. The FCC has released a request for public comments. So if you noticed any communication disturbance during the May solar storm, get with me later and I'll show you how to report the information to help improve space weather forecasting.
What kind of disturbance
Any communication, like if your GPS was acting strange, if your GPS went down, if you notice things that you'd normally report to like down detector during that time, those would qualify as things that we could report to the FCC during that solar storm because they may have been a result of the solar storm. Not guaranteed, but they may have. Okay. Okay. And current space weather, while 3664 was on the far side, our sun was relatively quiet. It's now rotated back around and been reassigned as 3697. Even though it's degraded quite a bit, 3697 has given us several strong flares, a minor solar storm, and an M9.7 yesterday that released a strong, likely Earth-directed CME, touched the S3 solar radiation levels, which is the strongest measurement since 2017. The Earth-directed component of the CME is expected to arrive between Sunday night and Monday night, bringing our KP index to between 4 and 7. This demonstrates a 4, and likely a good aurora show for our neighbors in the northern U.S. KP index is, if you look at the bottom right, this one right here, that actually measures, it's a measurement of the solar wind speed combined with a few other things to estimate the disturbance in the Earth's magnetic field. Very rough description, and I'm still learning.
Mayor, can you please David Mayfield from First Floor with the Services? David Mayfield from First Floor with the Services.
Oh, we are like where you're sitting.
Where I'm saying, so this is, we're like facing here.
Yes.
Okay. And how can you tell what's coming towards us versus
On this one, we really can't see exactly what's coming towards us. This is kind of the radiation that comes out from the sides. We can see. Oh.
you might have to go back.
Okay. If you can see the eruption right there, when it erupts, it sends energy in a big bowl, basically, in that direction. Everything in this set of information is still very new, and I am still learning. But I would like to leave you with this image showing yesterday's 9.7 eruption that gave us the S3 protein. Yeah,
This is what
this is the eruption from yesterday. Yeah. And like I said, we hit the S3 radiation storm levels, which is the highest it's been recorded since 2017. It's likely why you got the the alert at work. It has subsided. We just did go up a little bit right before I got here, so I wasn't able to include that. Let me see. But as you can see, yeah.
Any idea how much of that was Florida versus?
Since it was on the Earth-directed latitude of the sun, a good portion of it is Earth-directed. It was facing a little bit to the side of us, so hopefully the biggest chunk of it will go to the side of us, and it won't be a direct hit because of where the sunspot is. Yeah, we're likely to see those impacts tomorrow night or into Monday. The CME scoreboard that we have currently is estimating impact around early midday Monday.
When don't really important.
Yeah, things might be a little a little wobbly when technology is concerned. Um, Probably Sunday night going into Monday, because even though we have one impact from these things, the effects of it arrive here a little early, stay a little bit longer. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. And questions? Question? Anyone have any questions? Sorry. It really depends. If you take a look at this slide, when 3664 was here last time, this is just 2-3 days of activity. And as you can see, there's a number of X flares on there, and there's a ton of M flares. And those were all from 3664 or 3663. There were also a lot of big flares on either side of that. Prior to this chart, the big flares were coming from 3663. After this chart, they were more from 3664, which were more Earth directed. Yes, and they go on an exponential of 10. So like an X1 will be 10 times bigger than the M. It just like metric. just like a metric scale. Okay. Oh.
So what these vectors are just like the high energy photons that come from it and the charged particles.
Yes. So I actually made an analogy to help me understand and help explain. When I think of the sun, I think of like a wiffle ball. And the wiffle ball can shoot out air, water, and jello. So 3 different things, 3 different densities, masses, just different things. When a solar flare erupts, it's shooting either one or multiple of those things out of the wiffle on the wiffle ball. And if that is Earth directed, then those things will impact Earth in different ways. Just like a bolt of air would impact a tennis ball differently than a bolt of jello. The radiation, the S2 storm that we got, that's the radiation that comes first. And then the CME, this one is a fast moving CME, but it does still take a few days to, yeah, the jello takes longer to get here than the air does. Okay. Okay, anything? Okay. Okay, I didn't do the gift cards, I left them up there.
Oh, can I get your?
Oh, yeah, of course.
But that was really good. Thank you. Oh, did you want to ask somebody a question for the cards? Any questions? Okay. That is no worries, no worries. Okay, where are we? I think we're back here. Okay, cool. And then, so the next thing was we were going to have a couple of words by Keith regarding the Anita, who just recently passed away, actually. But I was wondering, oh, here we go. I was wondering, David, if you might be willing to come up here and say a few words and talk about our friend. I have this mic. I could just put it on you.
Okay. How long do we have for this?
5-10 minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, as you may know, Anita Gale was the CEO for the National Space Society, and she passed away just the Saturday before the International Space Settlement Design, or I'm sorry, the International Design, Space Development Conference. Sorry, long drive up here from Clear Lake, and my mind is not clear. But yeah, we had the International Space Development Conference that week that she had passed. Actually, when I was here last month, I had just gotten the word that she was in the hospital, and went on back down to Clear Lake so I could have a little bit of time with her at the hospital. So she was in good spirits at the time, and she knew her time was coming, and her biggest, I guess, remaining goal was to transfer knowledge to be able to help the Space Settlement Design Competition continue. So that's been, that was the effort for the next week or so. But Anita worked at Rockwell International, and she was, she had worked in the shuttle cargo integration area. And she was in Downey, California when Rockwell was bought out by Boeing, so she became a Boeing employee and continued to work in the shuttle cargo integration area, and moved out to the Houston area. She and her husband, Dick Edwards, who had co-founded the Space Settlement Design Competition back 40 years ago. And Anita had started it out as a thing for, I think it was Eagle Scouts, and that took hold and went international. We've had competitions all over the world. I've gone with her to India 3 times. She's done these, or had them going in many years. The winners of the competition get to choose out of their 30 to 50 some students on a team, 12 of them that would go to international. She would invite them to come to the competition, provide room and board and access to the Kennedy Space Center facilities, on the visitor center complex, and do a simulation of what it's like to be on a industry team taking an RFP or creating an RFP from preparing a proposal from a specific request for proposal from a customer, NASA-like customer. She called it the Foundation Society. They would have 50, 60 kids on a team, high school students, and they'd have on a regional just less than 24 hours to do a 50-page proposal. And there was a panel of judges, and the one company would be selected, and it was a real experience for the students learning how to work in an organization chart, as she would call it, like departments of engineering and marketing and so forth. And then when they get to the international, it would be the winners from the different regions combined with winners from other regions. So it was an international company that they had to work in. They got an extra day. But it was a real amazing experience. I was very fortunate to have met Anita back during the early 2000s when we were doing the shuttle-derived heavy cargo vehicle design options, and that was 20-some years ago. But I say Anita was one of the very first women engineers. She was often the only woman in the class when she was taking engineering, so she was always a great inspiration to the young woman that would be in her competition. And she always strived for excellence. You said the men sometimes didn't even know how to deal with there being a woman in the group, because all they'd seen women do were be secretaries and so forth. So she'd recount stories about that. Her approach to it was absolute excellence, everything that she would do. So there could be nothing she could be faulted for as a woman, and she instilled that kind of thinking in a lot of the girls and the women that she mentored on it. So it was a great loss to lose her. She was the kind of friend that would come insist on driving up to 3 days up to New Hampshire to rescue, as she would call it, my wife and I, when the car had been totaled in an accident, and 3 days back. with 1 day turnaround to mostly get packed, but half a day to see the area, and she really wanted to come back and see it again. But so it was just quite a shock. She passed 1 week after the weekend that I first saw her. That Saturday, it was the following Saturday, and I was able to get to visit with her several times during that period in the hospital and home hospice. So it was an honor to get to work with her. She'll just be sorely missed.
Chapter members, a number of them signed that card.
Yeah.
Was that card with
I cannot confirm that. I believe it probably was, but I know there were opportunities to stop by. Her visiting hours were pretty open during the time she was in the hospital, regular visitor hours there, but when they got her home, it was like an hour in the afternoon and an hour in the evening was about all they could allocate to that. But we had people that drove from Las Cruces, Dale Amon, one of the other NSS directors, and a colleague that Anita and I have with a company called Immortal Data. He's the CEO. She was also chief technology officer for that company. Dale drove all the way out from Las Cruces and we were able to get a good hour or so with her when she was in hospice. So, just a tough time on that. She tried to get a Yeah, she had really wanted to have a Zoom meeting for all the volunteers and a lot of the students and everything on that Saturday morning that she passed. But we'd set it up and she just wasn't, they said she wasn't able to really speak. And so we had to cancel it. So but I think that's yeah, to see Starliner actually and Starship. Yeah. A good thing was that she had planned on leaving for Europe the day before she was diagnosed, and her friend got her to go into urgent care and see about it before there was a big problem while she was in, I think, Hungary. And could have very well ended up that she'd have been there and no one really able to much go visit. So, Well, she had stomach upset a little bit, indigestion sort of feeling. She said she had started in about January. Food didn't quite taste normal, didn't taste quite right, and then a little bit of indigestion, and it just kept being an indigestion problem, which is, I guess, a common symptom for pancreatic cancer. That's why they got her to go in and get seen, just to make sure there wasn't a big problem when on the flight or in Europe. Very significant loss to the whole space settlement, NSS competition community. The competition's planning to continue. We're transferring the knowledge from some of the old material on it and figuring out how to create the scenarios, because every scenario she did was a little bit different. She never did the same scenario twice. It was a 5-year cycle where it would start out with a lunar base about 10 to 20 years in the future, and it would go out to a number of different settlements, a whole future history, fictitious but plausible, that would go all the way out to about 80 years in the future, and over the 5-year cycle, then it would reset. And what Anita and I would often do is figure out what was happening in the industry and what was new and how could that be wrapped into the new scenarios. And then scenarios also changed just a little bit so that it would be obvious to judges if anybody had utilized old material. She used to say her middle initial E was for evil, because she was a little bit, just a little bit like that as far as making sure that things like that would be detectable. And she would say she'd she would torment the kids because, you know, they had to work really, really hard. First time, you know, doing all-nighters to be ready for the material to be presented, and let them manage that themselves. But loved it because they'd always just, you know, once they do it, they just want to come back for more. And we had some of them, I think, did 6 or 8 different competitions and then became volunteers and then came back as volunteers. Quite an experience. So, all right, Nathan, well,
Thank you, David, so much for
thanks.
sharing that with us.
Yeah.
I got to see
Oh, yeah.
Anita a couple of days before she
Oh, you
passed,
did,
and she looked like strong. I mean, she was laid down the whole time, but she looked strong, and I would not have guessed it had been that weak. And so it's really sad to see her go, but it was amazing, all the friends that were there with her.
I mean, the thing was she really appreciated people coming in and telling her how much they really did appreciate her efforts on it. So a lot of that didn't get said enough. You know, when she was around.
Absolutely.
But she said competition had a little bit become not so much fun anymore because a lot of the hands changing it and doing things a certain way that didn't work with what
Right.
go along with how she was normally doing them. Never did exactly know everything that made it work. We just knew there was something about the formula that it worked, and she really was hesitant to change things like that.
Makes sense.
She just basically said, you know, ready to go. Year more or less. Well, in the space, 4 teams and 64. 4 teams and 64. Plus all the volunteers. We could build a whole company. For each company. They were given all of it. It is one of the years. Starting about 40 years.
That's amazing. Quite a legacy.
Yeah.
And yeah,
That's 10,000. Well, and that's only the winners from the regions. Each region companies that they would do 4 or 5 different companies, and those would be anywhere from 40 to 60 kids per company, and only the top 12 of the winning of those 4 companies could go to the international. Competitions were in Australia, China National, India National, Asian Regional, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Canada, 4 regions in the US, and now there's a tournament model. It's any organization could create their own tournament. They don't go to the international entity. It's all nice and small.
pretty amazing.
It's
Amazing
an
legacy.
amazing program. Is an amazing program. We're a nonprofit aerospace education competition.
That's good.
Oh, by herself and her late husband. My thought is they'd always call Anita the competition mom. And they said the competition mom. And so I think that sometime when people look back, there's real settlements in space.
Right.
They'll look back in the legends. Will be Anita the space settlement mom. Dick, the competition dad. O'Neill will have to be the granddad.
The granddad. That's cute. Well, thank you so much, David. Well, Greg.
Okay.
We'll pass it off to you for the space news. Oh, you
Okay.
already have
Yeah, I have
yours.
one. Yeah, you can
So,
keep that for questions.
Okay, for questions. Okay.
Just a brief note, Greg. and
Yeah.
That is, we were thinking that there'd be more people here. Well, I think I know where they might be. They're stuck on I-45 westbound.
Yeah.
It's
All jammed up,
shut down all the way back down into downtown.
Ah.
So it's an absolute mess. Very, very slow.
Yeah. Well, it happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of it happens, it did happen. We had a final test number 4 of the Starship. And this one is really the one that pretty much says they can do it. I mean, it's unquestionable at this point. So just for those who don't follow these launches that closely, even just terminology, Starship refers to the whole thing, or it can just refer to the top, to the second stage. Or then during some of the announcements, they just called it ship. I mean, notice how they were making, the SpaceX people were distinguishing it here. On the bottom, you have the booster or the super heavy booster or the super heavy. You hear all those variations as well. In between is the hot stage ring, which was relatively new, introduced back in the third test. And that's so that as they launch, they can start firing the engines on the top stage before they separate from the booster. But as a result, there's a lot of thrust, high temperature, pressure, everything. That would damage, obviously, the booster pretty badly. So they have to have a separate ring which deflects that thrust and temperature and so on. So we refer to the hot stage ring, and you'll hear references to that at times. If you look at that picture, you might be wondering, well, why did they paint it white here and there? Well, no, that's not paint, that's frost. You think about it, they're loading it up with methane and liquid oxygen. The methane at atmospheric pressure is like minus 260 degrees, so it's cold. So of course, this is this is Gulf Coast of Texas. It's pretty humid. So as a result, you get that frost, and you can tell actually. In effect, you can measure the liquid level, how much fuel they put in. Over on the left-hand side is the the actual display from SpaceX there. And as you can see, they were about halfway filled on these tanks, and you can see it pretty directly. You don't see that on the upper stage because you have those thermal tiles there, at least on this side of it. So you can think of that as being kind of like a Yeti cooler or a half of a Yeti cooler, because the other side is actually still stainless steel exposed. They only put the tiles on what's going to be the bottom as they descend, because that's where they're hoping to get most of the energy being absorbed. Okay. So it was a lot similar to Flight Test 3, except that everything worked this time. They did solve a lot of the problems along the way. The big thing, the goal they had was they wanted to have controlled landings all the way down. And the biggest problem they had, they lost control, actually both for the booster and for the upper stage in Flight Test 3. And they addressed all that. Biggest problem is they apparently had clogged lines for the attitude control thrusters, the smaller thrusters that actually are used to point, make sure you're pointing in the right direction. And they also just added more of them. They just added, they better, if this is going to be a problem, they better just make up for it with brute force, just like having more engines, the same kind of thing. Have more thrusters. They're small, but they're important. The key thing here is that both of the stages actually landed vertically as they wanted to. They wanted to have landings in the ocean, and that's what they did. The picture's at the bottom here. The left-hand picture, what you're looking at there is when the first and second stages separated. So that was just a nice kind of a picture there. The one in the middle is when the booster had almost landed in the ocean. I mean, it's kind of tipped just from the angle of the camera, but you can sort of see the water there. And the other on the right, that's just an animation. That's not an actual picture. It turns out I do have an actual picture. But the idea is they were going to try to land vertically at a predetermined position in the ocean to show that they could do it. And then at some point, obviously, it's just going to fall over and sink into the ocean. But the main thing was landing vertically on the water, which they essentially did. So that was actually quite an accomplishment, really.
I mean, at this point, it's like completely empty.
Yeah. Well, actually, their plan was if they needed to, they would actually purposely, trigger some explosions just to make sure it sank. Whether they did that or not, I don't actually know. But well, they left. There's some valves left open. I mean, eventually water would kind of get in there, but you think it would take a while. Surely somebody could come out of the speedboat and pull it off, but which they probably didn't want to happen. So that was a question everybody had back then. But the intention was it would just sink. Okay, I actually have a video of this. I just saw it this morning. Well, if I can get this to come up here. Yes. This is the booster. This is an actual picture of a landing. They apparently had a buoy right at the spot where it was landing. And so that also kind of, there's the buoy. That kind of proves that they managed to land it where they wanted to. That's what it looked like. And then this is the view from the ship itself as it's going down. So I guess they didn't show it toppling over or anything. But anyway, that was, yeah. Yeah. Oh. Now I got to figure out how to stop this. All right.
Question. I hear Elon is highly considering trying to catch up the chopstick.
Yeah, he's actually, he certainly got enthusiastic, I think, because of seeing this. He just said, yeah, let's actually try to bring it back. I mean, that's, of course, the goal is they want to bring back, actually, eventually, both stages back return to the launch site. And this is, that would be the next step, obviously.
Ellie on space is an interview apparently that he did yesterday, and exactly indicated that that's. Yeah, I think we're going to try and do it on the next one.
He thinks a little bit better about hedging, though. I saw that same interview. He said, I need to check with the team to make sure they didn't see anything.
Yeah.
All right, I'm trying to figure out how to get out of this. Somehow or other, I brought up this.
Maybe just click on that.
I don't see it back. Oh, up here, you mean? Oh, yeah, maybe. Oh, actually, you're right. Just close off that browser. Okay, there we go. All right, moving along here. So now this was the hot stage ring being dropped off. What's interesting is that they said that, well, they had to add the hot stage ring in between the two stages as a result of earlier testing. And that thing weighs 10 tons. I mean, if you're gonna stop the thrust of those huge rocket engines, it weighs a lot. And apparently that threw off all their calculations all along. So this time they said, well, okay, let's just drop it off. It's a temporary thing. When they get everything working well, what'll actually happen in the long run is that, one, that they won't have a separate hot stage ring. It'll just be built into the booster. And they'll also make the booster a little bit bigger, just to make sure that it has more fuel and it has more thrust. So that was kind of an interesting kind of thing. They did some subtests along the way. You're looking at the upper stage here, and those hexagonal things, those are the heat tiles. It's just the sun is kind of bright, making it look red. But you'll notice there's a couple of holes. They purposely left out a couple of tiles in areas they didn't think were too sensitive because they wanted to get some data on, well, what happens if you're missing tiles? How hot will it get? So they have temperature sensors in there. I have not heard anything about the results of that, but obviously, the mission succeeded, so apparently it was okay.
There's also they put another tile in there, and
there's a thin one somewhere.
Yeah, a thinner one just to the right of that upper missing tile. They've got one. You have to look close, but
oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't know where that was, but yeah, that's.
You're able to see it in some of the photographs. It's distinctly thinner.
Yeah.
It's recessed.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting. I mean, everybody was worried with the space shuttle. My God, if a tile, flies off, well, that's the end of the mission. And here, well, let's experiment a little bit. Let's just take a couple of them off. But they're not as worried. With stainless steel, it handles the high temperature much better. It also handles the low temperature much better of the cryogenic fuel, so the cold fuel. So it's really better all around. They know they can miss some tiles, and it probably isn't the end of the world. But they wanted to get some real data, and they kept saying the payload here is data. What they want to do is learn as much as they can. And so that includes purposely, taking a chunk out of your thermal protection system. Yeah.
So Greg, when I was at NASA and I talked with one of the propulsion engineers, they were getting ready to do the Falcon 1 tests. Even at that time, they had reported that they were doing things like running the engines in the test stand, doing things like throwing nuts and bolts and things into the engine.
Yeah.
See what it would do.
Yeah. And it's
robots that run.
It's not new.
Well, yeah. Well, that's good they do those kind of things. No, they don't do those when there's people in them, but that's just what testing is all about.
But even that, NASA would never have
No.
do anything.
No, and there's such a huge difference in philosophy and how SpaceX runs things. They're willing to do those kind of tests. They call that a hardware-rich environment. It isn't like some of the others where they try to simulate everything and then just, get it right the first time. That's pretty hard to do because there's things you don't anticipate. Yeah, like what happens if a pebble gets in there, and,
That was the thing with NASA. We never had enough extra hardware.
yeah, yeah.
The difference in
Yeah.
philosophy.
Yeah, well, and the results speak for themselves. I mean, they're easily 10, if not 15 years ahead of everybody else still. So, yeah, it's pretty clear. Okay, so, why did this tile thing matter? Well, you're coming down, you're going over 17,000 miles an hour. You got a lot of energy to dissipate, basically, to get down, and that's how they dissipate it. So they purposely fly at kind of an angle so that as they come down, the energy is spread over the whole thing, and that's why they have the tiles on that end. That they would look like, this is just an animation, but it looks like plasma, which is basically it gets so hot that everything dissociates into ions, and it's a whole messy environment. And in fact, that interferes with communications. And they proved this during the last test. But when you have this kind of a condition going on, you lose radio communication. And so what they did was they put on Starlink terminals, basically communications on the upper part of the craft. This is what it looks like on the top side. That can still communicate with the satellites because there's not that much of the, the ionization around it. And that's been working. So they actually were able to get all these pictures, with all this plasma surrounding ships that no one has ever seen before. They just couldn't get it.
Tremendous first for the science community, not
Yeah.
just the engineering community, the science community, like, yeah, wow,
Yeah.
real time.
Yeah. Well, and even just, even just qualitatively, just looking at it, seeing how the plasma kind of streams around everything, you get a good feel. And you'll see some later where it was pretty disastrous, actually. But, yeah, like that. Okay, so what you're looking at there is one of the top fins. See, like there's fins on the top and on the bottom that they use so that they can make a controlled descent. You don't need that on a normal rocket because you normally don't care what happens. You just let it fall. So they have to worry about it. So they have fins. And that's one of the upper fins you're looking at right there. And this is after it's been eaten away by the plasma for a while. It's falling apart. In fact, you can see there's one of the tiles that actually blew off, those hexagonal tiles, right there kind of in the center of the picture. And it basically just gets eaten away. And everybody was kind of wondering, my gosh, what's going on? But even during all this period, you could see the fins were still moving. And they were still controlling. And they never actually lost control, which is pretty impressive. But anyway, so...
You can see the ribs.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, it's pretty impressive. So by the way, there were a couple of failures, but they were not substantial. One, there were two engines that actually failed in the booster. One right away, right after takeoff failed, and it was one of the outer ones. And those are, those are only used, during the initial launch phase. But then when they return, as they start to do the boost back burn, and in particular as they're starting to land, they need the other engines. One of them failed too. But it turns out having so many engines, you can afford to lose a couple here and there, and it still works out, and that's what they did. But anyway, so back to this fault though. That flap, it was pretty melted. It got a lot of attention. They had already anticipated this might be a problem, and actually they have already done some better seals around the hinges, and I think they may done some moving around, but one way or another, they had kind of thought this might be a problem, and they already had made design changes, which will show up maybe not even in the next test, but probably in the ones after that. And of course, as we're saying, we're seeing this because of Starlink. The satellite communications, you never would have seen that kind of thing before. Now, you think it was bad here. Here we were at, it's kind of covered up, but it was, here, you're still at 54 kilometers up, still going 14,000 miles an hour. Yeah. So yeah, this was a little closer. This is when you're only 6 kilometers. That's the same thing. Now it's hard to see it, recognize what it is at first, that picture, but that is the same fin. Same camera is taking a picture of that. It's just that a couple things happened. Well, one, it got eaten away a lot more. The other thing is the camera itself, the lens had cracked, and also it had gotten hit with a lot of debris. So there's all these extra black smudges all over everything. And that's just because the camera took quite a beating. It's pretty impressive that the camera actually survived all this. But anyway, that's what the thing looked like. It still has 6 kilometers to go, but they were already down to 484 kilometers per hour. You're already subsonic, I think, at that point. So anyway, that was cracked, and visibly it was still controlling, and that's really the important thing. Because if they lost control, they never would have done the controlled landing at all. They actually managed to relight the engines on the Starship and do this vertical flip and sort of land vertically. And it wasn't clear if they really landed at 0 miles an hour. You couldn't quite tell that. They'll probably have more to announce about that. But fundamentally, it came pretty darn close. Now, so future flight tests, what has to come along in the future? One big one that they actually didn't do during the third test either is starting in engines while you're in orbit on Starship. They haven't done that yet. This was just a ballistic trajectory. They shot up getting to orbital height, but in such an orbit that it was going to then take them back toward Earth. And that way, in the event they couldn't relight the engines, they weren't stuck with an out of control rocket. It had a ballistic trajectory. So they need to do that. Then they can start testing actually going to orbit. So this didn't achieve, and it wasn't designed to achieve a full orbit right now. And then what they really need to do is they need to show that you can transfer fuel between 2 starships. And that's a little further down the road, but you have to achieve orbit before you can do that. They need the fuel transfer because as part of the Artemis program to go to the moon, you got to load up. You basically have to turn one Starship into a fuel depot and have a bunch of ships come up multiple times and fill it up. So they need to do that. And then finally returning to launch site. And as Nathan pointed out, they may actually be doing that maybe the next time. Instead of just dropping in the ocean, they're talking about actually coming back to the launch site. You know, you have these giant arms called the chopsticks. They'll just kind of reach in and grab the thing as it drops. So yeah, and maybe that payload door opening on the previous test, they didn't do anything with it this time. They sort of said that it worked, but it was not really very convincing. We talked about this at the time. You looked at it and you go, that just looks kind of shaky. Yeah. So yeah, this was not really a main point of this test. So they just didn't worry about it. And anyway, okay. So now changing over to a different topic, lunar missions. And there's been a lot of those, and there's still going to be a whole lot of those. The big one, of course, right now is the Chinese Chang'e 6. It's the lunar lander that is going to the far side. Now, China had been to the far side before, but they didn't have a sample return mission. And they've done a sample return mission, but it was on the near side of the moon, easier to deal with. So in this case, they just put it all together. They're doing far side of the moon and sample return. And they threw in a rover this time too, which was nice because then they got a picture of the lander. So they did that. Key thing is far side is more trouble. So one thing that meant was they had to get a satellite in place for communications, which they already did. They actually had one still up there, but they put a second one up just to make sure that they're actually covered on that. This one, the stuff that's kind of not as well highlighted there, that's stuff we talked about before. You know, they have payloads from various other countries, 2 kilograms of samples, that's what they're bringing back. Anyway, this one thing I hadn't thought about until fairly recently is because there's an ascender on this thing, you have a picture of what it looks like here. This is actually the previous generation, the Chang'e 5. And the ascender is the part that's up on the top there. Well, when it takes off, of course, that potentially could damage the lander. And it did in the number 5. So it may damage it, it may not. But in any case, because they assumed it might damage it, they didn't bother putting radioisotope heaters in it like they did in some of the earlier missions. They had been on the far side before for like a year, and they had the radioisotope heaters to keep everything warm. They didn't do that here, so it's guaranteed to end the mission, even if it doesn't get destroyed earlier. And I have yet to find out, you know, whether the thing survived or whether it was partially damaged, you know, when they did the ascent. But obviously they did the ascent. So where we are, well, first of all, yeah. But that mission is to return the sample to Earth. It's not talking about the viability of this particular craft. It's done its job. Basically, they did all the sampling within 2 days, you know, and then they launched the ascender to carry the samples back. So if you looked at that as the main part of the mission, what happened to this one afterwards didn't really matter. So this is what it looked like. Now this was taken, they took a rover with them. So there's a rover that went out there and it got that picture. That rover was actually a bit of a surprise. They just noticed that in some pictures right before they took off that they actually had a small rover. And I think that's why they wanted to get a good picture. You'll notice the Chinese flag there. They didn't actually plant one. A lot of people were saying there's a Chinese flag. It's left-hand side there. It just is a little thing that pops out. But nonetheless, that was, the Chinese flag has been shown on the far side of the moon. So in terms of the timeline then, so that the dark parts up above are things that have already happened. So what's new for this month is, well, first of all, lunar sunrise came. They were waiting for that. They were just orbiting the moon until the sunrise came. They landed June 1st. They took their samples. The samples are 2 kinds. They drilled down 2 meters, 6 feet. And they also scooped some dirt from the top. So they had 2 different kinds of samples. They did all that in the first 48 hours. They took off on the 3rd. The ascender went back up. And then they had to dock with the craft that they came from. It's called the orbiter. It dropped down to the moon. They had to shoot back up to that, link back up with it, and they did that. And then they had to transfer the sample to it because they're going to get rid of the ascender. They don't need that to go back to Earth. So, and that's what you're looking at in this hard to understand picture here. I think the upper one is probably the ascender and the lower one is the orbiter. But anyway, they're pushing the sample, from one to the other. And then they're going to discard the ascender, the thing that brought back from the moon, come back to Earth, and that should be about now. They probably are starting that, maybe yesterday, maybe today. You don't get the news necessarily instantly on these things.
We could just left it
big sort of over center cams that
Yeah, they just kind of
kind of
hugged it. Yeah, yeah.
It wasn't quite on center. It was like 6 inches off and
Mm.
slid towards the center and then they cramped down.
Yeah.
Got it.
Of course, it's impressive they even managed to do it at all when they get down to it. And they pretty much had one shot at it. I mean, the orbiter's up there. You go shooting by. You don't have that much fuel left on your sender. If you miss, that's it. And they didn't miss. They got it. So anyway, pretty soon the thing will be going back to Earth. And even at that point, they release a capsule which contains the sample, and that'll just come down. It'll land in Inner Mongolia, and then they'll pick it up. The orbiter itself is still up there, and we'll still have some fuel. So they're going to go off and they'll do other stuff. Don't know what. They did that actually on the last sample return mission as well. So, they don't waste it. If it's up there and it has fuel, they'll do something with it. What they did last time is they went to the Earth-Sun Lagrange point to look at that for a while, and then they came back to check out the orbit for what they used for their second satellite, which was the monitoring satellite, the communications relay. So they made good use of it. Okay, on the other hand, finally, the Japanese Slimlander, we talked about this before. Again, we've covered all the previous stuff that's kind of dark there. It's really dead now. He's dead, Jim. It's finally. But we've thought that before. We always said, oh, okay, it's pretty much dead. This is the one that landed upside down, and the solar cells were facing toward the west, so they didn't get the morning sunshine. They only had a couple hours, each day to do something. It finally stopped communicating, so we now think it probably really is truly dead. It may come back like a zombie, one more time, but nobody thought it would come back 3 times, which it did, but now it's finally given up. These things, if you don't have the radioisotope heaters, it's just hard to deal with the cold temperatures. And every time you ask me, how cold is it? And I keep forgetting to double check at that, partially because every time I look it up, I get different answers. It's like, oh, somehow it's a couple hundred degrees below zero, or it's 250, or, it kind of depends on the sunlight previous day.
Sort of the range.
Yeah, really cold anyway. Okay, another one, Dear Moon. Now this mission, some of you may remember, was sponsored by a Japanese billionaire. There's going to be a flight on Starship around the moon, and basically, maybe making a couple loops and then just coming back, no landing, just making a loop around it. But this guy, he had kind of an artistic bent. He went up there with artists and internet influencers, and he wanted to popularize and see what the culture would do with with going to the moon. He ran a contest. He had 1 million people apply to become part of this mission. I mean, 1 million people. That's people all over the world, but nonetheless, he had that, and that wasn't even done until 2022. But this guy was actually, in a sense, he was the first commercial Starship customer, even though Starship wasn't flying at the time. And he contributed quite a bit of money. I never saw the actual amount, but it was probably quite helpful in the early stages of Starship development. Anyway, he just pulled out of it. And what he said, which is no doubt is true, is that, well, it's been disappointing. The schedule was too optimistic. Probably they wouldn't actually be able to do this mission until the 2030s. It's a little odd because that was obvious, to everybody for a long period of time, including by 2022 when he finally selected his crew. These people, he actually admitted he was sort of worried that all these people will not be happy. But, what are you going to do? Anyway, he concluded. Now, there's been speculation. Some people said, well, he's probably lost a lot of his wealth. Maybe it was bad investments, but just the yen devaluation that's happened in the last couple of years is tremendous. It's gone from, it was 110 yen to the dollar. Now we're down to like 157 as of maybe a week or two ago. So that alone just cuts out your wealth if you're measuring it in dollars, which if you're a customer of Starship, you'd be measuring it in dollars. But the other thing is that if he had an itch to go to space, he got that scratched because he paid to go on a Russian Soyuz craft up to the International Space Station. He was there for 12 days. So he, at least by himself, has now been to space. So maybe that reduced some of the urgent need to feel like he had to go on his own lunar mission. From a SpaceX standpoint, really, they have a lot higher priorities to deal with and a lot more money coming in because of other missions. All the Starlink launches, they really want to get, they really need to get Starship going for that to start launching satellites at a much higher rate, and the bigger, heavier ones that they really want to launch. And NASA's Artemis program, they've really got to get that right. There's a lot of attention on that. So anyway, this mission is over. And now for something completely different. I'll bet. What could be more different than a unicorn on a moon with 5 legs? Well, anyway, you probably didn't see this coming. Lunar railroads. Okay, I'll bet you not many people here have thought, what are we going to do? When are we going to put railroads on the moon? Well, people are thinking about that now. There's 2 studies funded by the government right now. They're doing that. Defense Department, DARPA, the people who brought you the internet, they're actually a pretty important research group. And we talked about their study. They're actually funding a lunar infrastructure research right now. Basically, obviously, they don't say it that way, but obviously they don't think NASA is doing enough. So they're actually worried about that, and so they're also funding. And we covered some of the other projects, which sounded actually a lot more reasonable. This one's a little more questionable in my mind. And then NASA also, they actually internally funded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California to also study this, and we'll talk about both of those. But the goals in both of them are supporting daily operations, in the 2030s. I mean, the thing is, we don't even have any official missions to even build anything right now. And we have a lot of individual research has been done at NASA. There is no, like the Moon to Mars program, it doesn't cover any of this kind of stuff. It just kind of assumes someone else will do it. And this is the people doing it. Yeah.
We have seen lunar railroads going in and greater in 5 to 7 or 8 years ago, elevated, and a lot of it was to keep it out of the dust.
I would imagine that would be one of the biggest problems. In fact,
on the surface.
Yeah. And I'm going to comment on that. So by the way, anyway, Northrop Grumman is the one who got the funding from DARPA to do a study on this. And this is not from them. Let me make that clear. That picture, that's just a made-up picture. But in spirit, it is pretty much the same. There's 2 ways you could imagine building railroads. I mean, one of them is say, just take every little part and everything we do on Earth and just do the same thing on the moon. But make some allowances. Like, okay, gravity's different, the soil is different, and that's what they're doing. And then JPL's kind of went the other way. We'll get to that. But why do you even want to do this? Well, you do have a transportation need. Ultimately, once you have a significant civilization going, you got an industry. You're going to be mining. You're going to be pulling in, maybe you're pulling in stuff to get water out of it. Maybe you're pulling it in to start making solar cells or get out the titanium and aluminum, that kind of stuff for construction purposes. Even just getting the regolith to cover up your structures to protect yourself from radiation, you need to use the local resources. So you're going to need something, and you're going to be doing mining kind of operations. So that's one thing. And the other thing is just getting around the base. And in particular, you don't think about it much, but landing zones. Well, it's pretty hard to land all that accurately. I mean, actually, nobody has managed to land that accurately on the moon. That Japanese Slimlander was the only one that's ever really come close to doing that. You can't build it really, you can't land necessarily like 100 feet from where all your facilities are. So you need something to transport you to a little further place. So that's the kind of thing they'd be looking at. So this is an actual slide from Northrop Grumman. I wouldn't have thought anybody could make railroads on the moon boring, but they managed to. And they pretty much just took a catalog, and they're the kinds of things, but I mean, what they're doing is actually quite reasonable if you assume, let's do what we did on Earth. Well, we need tracks and we need, switching gear. One thing that's a little bit different is the construction equipment for laying the track and for building and creating the track, but that's a different issue. That's under construction and maintenance. They figure, okay, you're gonna have different kinds of, you're gonna have flatbed trailers and you're gonna have tankers. It's actually hard to imagine not having all that stuff, but somebody has to write it down and start thinking, how are we going to do it? Well, and that's what they're doing. So this is their vision for a train, sort of reasonable in a lot of ways. I think it's kind of questionable that small amount of solar cells is really going to provide enough power, even during the daytime. And obviously, it won't do it at night. So they made allowances for that. They said, okay, well, at night you fold in the solar cells. Okay. But as I was saying, they are addressing some of the design issues, like the lunar regolith. They called it soil, but the dirt. The regolith. You'll sink in it. Go ahead.
When a comment from Anita would be, there is no soil.
No, I didn't make this slide. I didn't. It's amazing to me that the people were.
They would actually put that in.
They did.
Soil
yeah.
Has biomaterial.
People that have a biological bias object strongly to the use of the word soil when it comes to it's regolith, it's dirt, it's crushed up rock and this and that.
We see this a lot, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of it goes back to civil engineering and civil mechanics.
Yeah. Well, on Earth, there isn't that much of a distinction. Okay, maybe the sand in the middle of the worst desert, the Atacama Desert or something, but yeah. But I did actually think of her. That sort of played in my mind that she was one of those people who strongly objected to. Yeah. Yeah. Until it has biological components in it. Yeah.
Do you know if they're considering the magnetic rail at all instead of just regular like?
That's the NASA one, which I'll get to in a minute. Yeah, these people know they're thinking normal wheels and and everything else, tracks. So you can see it, pretty much it's on tracks. So you deal with a regolith that's different. It kind of crushes down. If you're going to make this, the real problem is how do you make the steel or whatever you're using for the rails in the first place? That takes a lot of energy. And the other thing is gravity. You don't think about it much, but with the lower gravity, you're going to have to bank more. If you go around a turn, you got to deal with that. So anyway, there's little things like that. They've been thinking about these kinds of issues. So if you're starting off saying, let's reproduce Earth railroads, there's your project for you right there. And you can't really dismiss it completely, other than wondering, is the population density and industrial density really high enough to justify rail in the first place? I mean, realistically, I think you're going to be using little, electric cars, for a while here. But at some point, when the population density goes up, you start to worry about this.
Got it out of the dust.
Pardon?
They got it out of the dust.
If they get out of the dust, yeah. Yeah, dust is one of the biggest things. Now, so let's talk about what NASA is proposing, or JPL is proposing specifically. I would call this is more outside the box thinking, which although maybe actually that would be a more modern version of Rodin's thinker here. They came up with something called float, which is flexible levitation on a track, and they need magnetic. It's a maglev kind of an approach, but it's not even like the ones you see on Earth. It's actually something rather different. This was awarded a NIAC award. We've talked about those before. This is the NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts. Every year they fund projects, which are supposed to be kind of leading edge, cutting edge kind of things. This is a phase 2 award, so that means they've already passed a phase 1 project. They made it this far. Phase 2 is limited maximum of $600,000. I don't know what the other one was. It's probably more, but we know that they can't be getting any more than this. And this is what it looks like. It doesn't look like your average maglev train that you'd see on Earth. Not that there are that many, but it's different. One is that they're envisioning it as like a flexible membrane kind of thing. It actually would be laid down, just from a vehicle. You kind of roll it out like carpet. Think of it as a carpet runner. And there's some advantages to that. Well, one is if you decide you want to move it, you just roll it back up and take it and move it somewhere else. They don't do any road preparation. They just kind of do it. Now, how you're going to actually keep everything on those tracks is not at all clear, or certainly when you want to go down into a crater. But the big advantage cited is you don't have abrasion from dust so much as a problem. You're raised up. That's what they claim. So what else? Well, that's pretty much it. Now, there's this design, they're actually seeing it as autonomous vehicles, and the vehicles themselves are unpowered. All the power is done through the track itself. There's a graphite layer, which I think mainly is just probably for protection among that, if anything else. There's a flexible circuit layer, and that's what actually controls the thrust. How they're going to make that work, I don't know. There are no details available on that. And then they might have a thin film solar panel to provide some power as well. That's optional. So, but as I said, the magnetic levitation supposedly minimizes a lot of the dust abrasion. I would think it actually could get in the gap and still screw things up, but who knows? But as I said before, the tracks unroll. They're flexible. You just roll them out. And the good thing is it doesn't take a lot of construction. Building Earth-style railroads takes a lot of construction equipment, a lot of digging. You avoid grades. And of course, if you have craters, what the heck do you do? Well, actually, this doesn't solve the crater problem. It's kind of hard to imagine putting this over the edge of a crater either. So, these are all things to be determined. So you kind of wonder, you ever wonder about, well, how do these people get paid? What exactly do these people deliver if you haven't worked on research projects before? Well, there's a couple things, and there are deliverable items for a project like this. One is you're going to do some prototyping, and that'll be on Earth, obviously, and some kind of a test bed. So they'll have some kind of a simulation, with hardware vehicles of some sort or another. And the other big thing will be some kind of a technology roadmap, sort of saying, what are the design factors? I've got to, you worry about, gravity being different, the high temperature, low pressure, all those kinds of things. Identify the factors, identify the gaps, what don't you know how to do yet, where you have to do further research. And then manufacturing, there's a serious manufacturing issue here. Either you're going to import a bunch of rail from Earth, which seems unlikely. So that means part of this project, what's hidden, the real effort is, how do you make all that rail in the first place? Not so much maybe for this stuff, but certainly for the other, the rail alternative, you do that. And then risk mitigation. How do you minimize all the various risks? So anyway, that's what they will be delivering as part of this. Now, my reaction, go ahead.
They talk about manufacturing, talk about manufacturing because, bringing it all from Earth.
Yeah, it would be way too expensive. Now, the reality is, of course, we don't actually have the technology to make it on the moon yet either. But I mean, this is all a process that has to gradually take care of itself. We will, there's projects underway to figure out how to extract metals, from the regolith as well. Basically, you melt it. It comes down to almost everything says you're going to melt it. You just can't get past that. Which means you have to have a lot of energy. So that also means you have to solve the problem of having enough energy, which means you probably need nuclear reactors. And so. Which, by the way, that the Chinese are doing. I don't know that we're really doing that yet, but that's another story. Okay.
During the day using solar power, and all that stuff.
Well,
Get all the components printed out, and then you spend the 2 weeks of darkness putting everything together.
Yeah, I mean you could. It's just that's 14 Earth days of darkness. Yeah. Now, the real problem is just the sheer amount of energy it's going to take. And then how inefficient it is if you have to wait 14 days, every time for the night to finish. 14 Earth days for that night to finish. We need better terminology for this. Okay, my immediate reaction is, if you're going to do something like this, why not do some kind of a tramway? When you get down to it, I mean, ski resorts do this. I actually saw a small village in Italy, above Positano, where they didn't really have a decent road going to it. They used trams, and they didn't even transport people so much. It was mainly for cargo. They brought stuff in and out. When I first saw it, I was kind of laughing, thinking, oh, this is so primitive. But actually, it was a perfect solution for their situation. They had terrible access, and it's not that hard to build this stuff. You can go over craters. You can go over mountains. That's all proven technology. It's not that hard. These things, obviously, they're not going to be up that high, but fundamentally, they just have to be high enough to be off the ground, and you're all set. And then you may have expanses like that when you're going over a crater. But that's the only way to do it. I mean, running a road, whether it's on maglev or whether it's on rails, either way, going down into a crater, it just is going to take a lot of excavation to smooth out the grades. And, you need something like that. You don't need so much material to build it, to do much to the ground. You don't have to do anything really, as opposed to building roads, basically. You can cross that rough terrain. The South Pole, which is where everyone wants to go, it's very rough. There's a lot of craters, it's craggy. I mean, that's why there's so much trouble landing there. And you get less dust. And that's in operation. The dust has an electrostatic component to it, and that's part of the problem. Actually, just running by, you generate enough electricity that with the charged dust that's already there, you tend to stir it up or attract it. And that's a problem you generate. And also, if you're up above it higher, you're not going to attract it either. So either way, you're avoiding a lot of the dust. So we'll have to do a NIAC proposal for this, obviously. Okay, moving on to back to Earth, sort of. Starliner. I mean, you kind of forgotten about it already because of Starship and so on. But the Boeing people have finally managed to get their Starship or their Starliner to carry crew up to the International Space Station, the ISS. It lifted off on June 5th. It did dock a day later. It turned out they had some problems with the thrusters, the attitude control thrusters, reaction control system. Which they need to be working so they can go right into the station. It was software. Once again, Boeing is not very good at software. They think that's what it is. That basically what happened is the thrusters just get marked as being bad even when they're not bad. So it's like they have bad alarm limits. Somehow or other they think if they're slow to, who knows what they're thinking. I'm surprised that they haven't figured out, well, what are these limits? It's like they say, well, we don't know what the software is doing. Well, who wrote this software? Probably some third-party contractor that was an intern that has long since gone on to work somewhere else, be my guess. It's not impressive because they've had these problems before. This is not the first time they've had problems with thrusters. So anyway. The other thing is they knew they had some helium leaks, but they figured that was actually okay. But there were some different helium leaks that appeared. Now, the helium leaks are neat. I don't know if they're thrusters for maneuvering, if they work directly off the helium or if they pressurize what actually does. I'm not even sure which way they do it. But either way, you need helium. And they had leaks. And they actually had to repressure. They must carry some extra, equivalent of tanks with them. And they repressurized it. But it took them a while to do all that. So that was extra. But they finally got it. And what's interesting is, United Launch Alliance, that's been around for quite a while. It's the merger, or it's a combination of Boeing and Lockheed Martin. They have never launched people into space before. Never. I mean, the space shuttle did that. That was a NASA-only thing. Now, there obviously contractors built that for them, but it wasn't them. That was the first time an Atlas V had ever actually carried people into space. Atlas V had hundreds of successful launches, but it was never actually officially human rated. They did it. That's an Atlas V right there. So, they
got 16 more left of them.
They're working them down. Yeah, they're not building them anymore in any case. So at some point, if they're going to continue with the Starliner, they'll put it on some other rocket. So there is a long history. First of all, they're 4 years behind. They were in a competition with SpaceX, and SpaceX started, carrying them up there 4 years ago. So they're finally there. But even recently, there have been a couple of scrubs. It was scrub meaning they'd have to reschedule the launch, especially after you already had the astronauts sitting up there in their seats ready to go. That happened on May 6th. There were a couple of problems. They discovered a helium leak along the way after that, and that stopped as a result the May 25th rescheduling. And then on June 1st, they were going to take off, and they had a problem with their triple redundant computers. One of them, apparently wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. And you think, well, triple redundant, that's great. But the thing is, it's supposed to be triple redundant while you're taking off, And their conditions were, if you don't have that triple redundancy to start with, don't launch. So it was a power supply. Now, why they don't have redundant power supplies, who knows? Anyway, they got that sorted out and everything. They managed to launch. And it was a good thing they did, because if they hadn't launched by June 6th, which was just a day later, they would have had to put it off at least 10 days because they would have had to replace the batteries in the Atlas V. In particular, the batteries that would do the flight termination system. If you have to blow up or at least disable the thing so that it can't go off the flight path in case of trouble, you need those batteries to do that. And so they made it by 1 day, or they would have had to wait yet another 10 days. So they were pretty glad this all went down.
Batteries were a problem. On Artemis 1, some of the tube shafts were lost because they were charged. Almost seems like going forward, we should design rockets so everything can be charged and powered around.
Yeah. It all goes back to there's sort of a single-use mentality, in the whole business, but they don't, even with single use, you have these problems all the time. And, if you just build up in the beginning with rechargeable batteries, or at least made them more accessible, and part of the problem is just so many problems, they can't just fix it on the launch pad. They got to actually roll the thing all the way back to the building where they built it, and then have cranes take it apart very carefully and people work on it. And anytime you have a problem, it slows you down. And it's not a heck of a way to run a business.
It's going to be SpaceX's next project. Someone will figure out that the payload section for all those payloads that they get, like 30 payloads at once in that area, that one special area on the rocket that tag along with other satellites, they'll come up with something that charges. All of those payloads plug in basically to something.
Yeah, you think they should.
Yeah, just put a plug in there with a power adapter.
Yeah.
So that,
It's so simple. Yeah, the SLS failed that way. All those, they lost so many of their secondary missions.
Right.
Yeah.
Read that secondary report, but the same helium connector caused a problem with docking. They couldn't dock the first time. They had to back it off and do it again because of the same helium problem with the ejector.
Yeah, so they even knew they had a problem with it. It's probably some kind of a seal problem of some sort. But why didn't they solve it? We don't know. Okay, but Starliner is going to help flush out a real problem here on the ISS. they had a pump that failed on the space station. It's one that they need for urine processing. You know, that is one of the few things that they recycle almost completely inside the space station. So all the urine and sweat and everything else gets recycled into drinking water. That pump weighs 150 pounds, and the next cargo mission wasn't until August. So it turns out this thing was available, and so the bad thing is, of course, the astronauts had to give up some luggage. This is really strictly for carrying people. They don't have any cargo capacity to speak of. So they had to give up their luggage, you know, all their changes of clothes and toilet articles and whatnot. They had to get rid of 150 pounds of that, but they did it. So the pump went up. Now, I haven't heard if they've installed it and, you know, solved the problem, but it really mattered because there's tanks and bags that were just filling up on the space stations. And, you know, that's you always want to recycle everything to minimize the amount of water you have to bring up or whatever it is. You always want to recycle things, but you also have to have the equipment in place, you know, that will keep working, you know, all the time. And apparently they didn't have a spare pump up there. They didn't want to take the 150-pound hit. So anyway, Starliner is to the rescue here. Okay, quick updates on manufacturing in space. We've talked about these before. There's been a lot of research going on in the last couple of years on the space station for figuring out what can you make in space that works better and would be actually competitive with products on Earth. So some of these products actually have come back on the most recent Cargo Dragon return from the space station. One was printed living cardiac tissue. This is bioprinted. You know, think of 3D printing except with, you know, with cells. They would use that for repairing hearts, and so they're going to, you know, evaluate it. But their next goals, they're going to be doing blood vessels, and eventually they want to do entire organs. But the key thing is, they think they can actually do this in space. Basically, without the gravity being there, you can make the structures a lot better without things falling apart and so on. And they've apparently concluded that it really is more effective in space. They're also doing a bunch of research sponsored by Eli Lilly. They actually brought back 36 different experiments for people doing that, basically for making drugs of one form or another. Yeah, so there's, everybody's looking for the killer app. You know, what can we do in space that we can't do that well on Earth? And they're still struggling, but, you know, we're getting a lot closer. I think these kind of things are encouraging. Actually, in some ways, the most encouraging is this one, optical fiber. Now, there's various ways to make optical fiber for communications networks and so on, but the ones on Earth mostly are made from sand or silica. But actually, there's a one called ZBLAN. That's an acronym that stands for a whole bunch of other elements that are used, and I couldn't even begin to tell you what they are. But it's actually a factor of 10 to 100 absorbing less light. So as a result, you can, you know, if you don't need so many repeater stations, for instance, if you're doing undersea communications under the ocean, you have to have repeaters pretty often, you know, to take the incoming signal because it's been attenuated by the, you know, basically the non-clarity of the fiber, and re-amplify it and then shoot it on to the next one. If you can avoid all that, it can make a huge difference. Also, apparently, there's some laser applications that are more immediate. So the reason it's better is that there are a lot fewer imperfections when you manufacture it up there than there are on Earth. And that's the competitive advantage of space in this case, is fewer imperfections. So typically either you're making stuff that, well, I have a slide on this, but we'll get to it. This stuff sells for $1,000 a meter.
$1,000 a yard. Jeez.
Yeah, $1,000 a yard. Okay, never, all right. Anyway, that's the first time they've really done what we call commercial quantities here. That set some records. They made 8 kilometers of this cable up there, and the longest single length was 1 kilometer. You know, so this is actually approaching something you can actually sell, kind of an industrial scale. They made a daily record of a half a mile of fiber in one day. So this is a big step forward for manufacturing in space, actually.
And they did this while there were people running around.
Well, most of them, they tried to make them as automated as possible. You know, so that's kind of the goal. And as a result, my guess is what will really happen is there's way too much human intervention involved in all this stuff with the space station. What will happen is once they perfect it in this lab environment, the space station is a wonderful lab environment. But like any other manufacturing situation, once you prove it in the lab, you do your manufacturing somewhere else. They'll probably do it in something like the Varda industry stuff that we've talked about before, where they just send up their own separate craft, and then they just bring it back down when it's done. And you know, they don't bother the station. But the space station is playing a very important role in this kind of research, is figuring out what you can make. And there's all kinds of they're all small scale, you know, things that, you know, aren't much bigger than people, or maybe even quite a bit smaller in a lot of cases. but they're proving out the processes. Actually, this particular one, their first testing was done in the Vomit Comet. You know, the plane that gives you like two or three minutes of weightlessness. They would actually get up there and everybody all ready to go the second, and they were doing little experiments, you know, even in that 2 or 3 minutes. And so, you know, that they do that kind of study first, and they say, okay, now let's try it on the space station where it's always weightless. You know, so there's a process you go through to do this, and we're getting there.
Well, I'm impressed that they managed to produce stuff with all the astronauts on board the space station going around there doing their things, because the astronauts bounce off the walls and it causes vibrations.
Yeah, that's right.
The station, they're not big, but they're there.
Yeah.
How each vibration causes an imperfection
in
that optical fiber, but they managed to sort of barely cancel that out or attenuate that.
Yeah, I don't know how they dealt with it in this case. Maybe it just wasn't so much of an issue for them. Some of the others they've talked about just running them separately outside the space station, you know, and avoiding that. The vibrations are a definite problem. Okay, so let's see. So thinking about it, you know, when will you finally succeed in manufacturing in space? Well, you have to have a couple of key things. One is it has to be very expensive stuff, you know, just to justify, you know, the efforts of getting up there and getting back. I mean, just, you know, that's huge. So that costs a lot. But, you know, in this case, if you can sell $1,000 a meter, and they had 8 kilometers of the stuff, they've already paid for that mission. And the other thing is, there are some things that you can probably make better in space. Typically, it's things like crystals. You know, you can avoid. They can grow. They don't get pulled down by gravity. So things like microgravity are important. Maybe the vacuum conditions. Maybe the low temperature if you do it outside. Yeah.
Or they don't have to be brought down.
That's right. Yeah, longer term. Yeah, there's gonna be a whole lot of that. Like we ought to be manufacturing solar cells with lunar materials and that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Now. But there's a couple bottlenecks in all this. The biggest one is down mass, getting back to Earth. And that's the problem with just the space station right now, is that there aren't that many ways to bring anything back, you know, from space right now. Okay.
But hopefully that will be solved by the third company.
Yeah, Varda. Yeah, they just send their own capsules up and bring it back down when they're ready. Yeah.
Sierra Nevada.
Oh, okay. Yeah, even those things will help. Yeah.
They're getting ready to launch there. The next one's up.
That's true.
The second launch.
Yeah.
And that little winged type kind of miniature space shuttle of theirs, that is a cargo shuttle. The first 3 that they're going to send up are cargo shuttles. Globally.
Yeah.
So they have apparently a very substantial down mass.
Yeah. The other capability is going to be inflatable heat shields. NASA's working on that, and actually, there's one of those other companies that competes with Varda that they just did it with metal, but they just made it so big it's like an origami kind of thing that unfolds. They made it huge, and it just drops down, you know, and is reusable. It actually doesn't melt the metal so badly that it can't be reused. So as we come up with these ideas, you know, again, everything as you think of it and you get started, you know, you start realizing, oh yeah, well we could actually, you know, figure out a much better way to get the stuff back down to Earth. So I used to think, oh, you'll never be manufacturing stuff in space for use on Earth. But it turns out they probably will be doing it. Okay, here, pop quiz. What rocket, what country? The rocket is actually off that way you can't read what it says on the side. What is it? From where? Oh, Elbonia. You know, well, actually, I think that's way too sophisticated a city for Elbonia, though. But,
the rocket actually took off.
It took off, yeah. It took off from a bar. I'll show you the next. I'll show you. There's a picture with the barge, but then it'll be obvious who sent it. Okay, I'll get. This is actually a city in China. It's called. You probably never heard of it. It's a town called Rizhou. It has like 3 million people, but of course, you know, that's a tiny little burb in China. This is actually what the picture looks like. In this picture, you can see the barge in the center there. That's what it's launched from. It's called the Series 1 rocket. It's actually a fairly small rocket. The barge it was launched from looked like this. So that's, and this is just 3 solid stages plus a hydrazine stage. So it's kind of a messy thing. But what's interesting is it's pretty low capacity, 800 pounds. You think 800 pounds, that's nothing. But actually, the Electron rocket, you know, which is actually one of the most popular ones once you get away from Falcon 9, that only carries 600 pounds to low Earth orbit. So it's actually, you know, more powerful than that. Now, you compare that to Falcon 9, which will take it 39,000 pounds. If you return to a drone on the first stage, if you expend it completely, you can get 50,000 pounds. So there, this is a pretty small one by comparison, but there is still a market for that. So that was kind of interesting. But yeah, there's all these rockets coming out of China that we don't tend to hear of. So every now and then I'll bring one of these in. So you can probably guess it when I say, where is this from? Well, it's probably China. Okay, now we're at the point where we can ask, how many launches do you think we've had? And you're going to say 1 million. Doug does that a lot. Oh, you're really coming down. I'm impressed.
19.
Okay, we're getting closer now. Okay, so first of all, as a reminder, this is of course Starship taking off. Wait a minute, didn't you do your research? Oh. She was spot on last time because she actually cheated and looked.
That's not cheating.
It's not cheating, it's doing your homework, yeah. I'll bet you were a good student, weren't you? Okay. By the way, I was unrelated to this question. I'll point out something. You'll notice this is taking off. This is like 1 second, the T minus or T plus 1. You'll notice the clouds shooting out. They go out in all directions. Everybody criticized SpaceX early on when they didn't put in flame deflectors and stuff. And if you look at a typical launch site, including even some of the Falcon 9 ones, typically it just shoots out on one side. And their point was having this big milk stool kind of thing to have it sit on, it just shoots out, in every direction. It means that the forces that are exerted and everything are actually less because they're spread around the full 360 degrees. They're proving that right there.
And they're also balanced.
And it's balanced, yeah. It's not like it's tipping, off to one side. So it's kind of interesting that.
Well, this just goes to show the thing is that for decades, the rationale or the mindset was that this is the way NASA does it. That must be the right way. And then it became that must be the way. And it took quite a lot to change that mindset. And Elon Musk and his people have done that. And there is more than one way to skin a cat or launch a rocket or whatever.
Yeah.
I can imagine with a ship that size now thrust.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah.
If we had a flame trench, the launch pad might move over a few feet every time we launch. Yeah, really.
Yeah. It's not an easy problem to solve. So it seems like they've got that down now. Okay. It's like 23. I see there's 10 here. 1, 2, 3. There's 11. There's 20. Okay, so there's 13. There's 24. 24 is the answer. So you were closest. We have a winner. Okay. All right. We're probably running short on time, so I'll skip over.
The only thing our guest speaker. It's like we'll make it maybe close that topic.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So.
Well then, okay. All right. Well, let's go through every single one, step by step by step. First, they put the fuel in. Then, okay. I'll point out just a couple of things in all these various launches. This time you have much more other people, like you have North Korea doing a launch. That one failed. At least it wasn't just all China and America, which is what it had been more recently. One other thing I will point out is the SpaceX people are getting serious about Starlink having direct-to-cell communications capabilities, talking directly to your cell phone. I put them in parentheses there. So the third one is the first one there. The third one down is the first of the Starlinks that's adding direct-to-cell capabilities to the satellites. They already had maybe 30 or 40 of those up there. They put up 39 just in this time period. They've been doing 13 on every flight. So they do a total of say 20 satellites. And of those, 13 of them have this direct-to-cell capability, meaning they have the much bigger antennas so that they can actually communicate with your cell phone. Starting off just with text.
Unmodified cell phones?
Unmodified cell phone, yeah. Well, don't forget, see, there have been people in business doing this already. I can't even think of the name, Astro. Well, anyway. And for instance, so AT&T and Verizon are thrown in their lot with one of these other companies. There's one called Link, which already has service in Samoa or somewhere. Then there's this other one whose name escapes me right now that all the American ones have jumped in on. But they haven't gotten anything up yet. They do have their prototypes up, but they don't have commercial service. And they're going to be having commercial service at this rate fairly quickly, I think. This is really backup. It's really, so what happens if you're in an area where you're in a dead spot? You know, you're in a national park, or, you know, there's been a national or some kind of natural disaster, so the lines are down. That's really the market. They're not really trying to compete with, you know, your normal cell phone use. The cost is just, you know, not going to work. But as a backup and as a way to reach some customers you would just never reach otherwise, you know, it's a way to do it. So that's why they're doing it. Okay, another one, there's been a lot of brouhaha about the Russian launch of that Cosmos 2576. Is it a space weapon? I was going to try to talk about that, but the reality is when you get down to it, there's just not much you can really say, because you really have to have access to classified information to actually know what people think it really is. So.
Go ahead and mention the worst case scenario.
Well, the worst case is the least likely. It has that there's actually a nuclear weapon on it, and you just explode it, and you take out everybody's satellites, including your own. It's an electromagnetic pulse. The pressure wave that destroys most things on Earth isn't really an issue so much in space, because there's no medium to transmit that. But the electromagnetic pulse will knock out everything.
The notion is that it's in a very strange orbit,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like no use for this orbit, no non-military use.
Well, for surveillance, actually, we have one in that same orbit. We have a spy satellite in that exact orbit, and that's one of the complaints, is it's actually following ours.
And the notion is that it basically just grazes the inside of the inner Van Allen radiation belt, and the Russians have said that, oh well, they're testing radiation of our equipment, and it's like, yeah, well, if you're going to do that, you need to jack it up about 1,000 miles higher. And so the rationales that they have given for what it's doing don't really make sense.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, if there is a nuke on board, it's at the perfect altitude to wipe out everything below it.
Yeah. So, I mean, and, you know, I don't doubt that they have planned for it. Whether that's what's in this one or not, I think a more likely one, if you're going to put anything nuclear up there, you're probably going to put up a reactor to provide the power, so that you can have some kind of directed energy weapon just to point and pick off individual satellites. That to me seems a lot more likely, because, I mean, they rely on this stuff. I mean, I guess they don't really care about their own astronauts. If they get wiped out, they don't really care when you get down to it. But, you know, they do care about their own satellites. Now, they have a lot of the older ones like we do that are way, way up in geosynchronous orbit. But still, they're going to have some. And, you know, doing everybody, actually, China would get so mad. I mean, probably, if anything, China would probably stop them from doing it, because they say, hey, they've already committed way too much to low Earth orbit stuff, including their own space station. That they would be very unhappy. I think it's actually unlikely that they would actually just blow something up. Now, they might threaten to. You know, and that's what deterrence is all about. You know, you hope you never actually have to do it, so they can threaten, and it's always possible.
They threatened to blow up Boulder. And they did it on live television, apparently, in Moscow. And they said, well, you know, there will be no Polish people, no Polish language, no Polish culture or Polish history. And, you know, we can all live with that, because who cares? It's like the Westerners, I mean, do you really think that England and France and United States will be upset about Poland getting blown up? No, nobody cares. And it's like, these guys obviously didn't understand what started World War II.
And won.
Well, World War II was definitely Poland.
Oh, okay. I was saying in general, but, you know, in so-called obscure parts of the world, having something go wrong. Anyway, yeah. So, yeah, who knows? I mean, there's always been a lot of these satellites that are sort of the inspector kind, where basically they go up and they're very maneuverable, and they go up and they look at your stuff. Maybe they're intercepting your signals. Maybe they're trying to figure out your technology. And there's the implied threat that they can just crash into you, or you know, have robot arms to dismantle you and all that kind of thing. And everybody's done that, actually, China, Russia, and America. So we all have that kind of capability. I don't think there's that much of it actually deployed, except maybe the Chinese, because they demonstrated in geosynchronous orbit. Well, actually, so did we. So, you know, it's all possible. But the reality is, we probably aren't going to know. Let's see, what else? Oh, one interesting one. Okay, one of these launches, one of the Chinese ones, included one that was there's a new category, relatively new category of satellite called very low Earth orbit, VLEO. We always think of low Earth orbit, you know, you're up a couple hundred miles or whatever. Well, lower Earth orbit, in the past, we didn't think about it that much, because satellites will not stay up very long. there's just enough friction that'll slow down. But still, they can go around and make quite a few orbits. And if they're powered one way or another, maybe they can keep themselves aloft. The advantage is there's a lot less time delay in communicating with it. So if you're trying to replace Earth communications, it's actually maybe viable. And so they're exploring that. Other people have as well. This is not the first time that's been done. But everybody's kind of looking into doing these kind of things.
I know that the more or less standard orbit, 250, 230 miles for the space station, is about a 93-year orbit. So when we get down to 93 miles.
Yeah. I don't know. It's got to be a lot faster, but I don't actually know what. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's why, of course, that's why the friction gets even more noticeable, because you're picking up that much more. So anyway, it's just interesting that, there is more and more of that. I mean, of course, there's also people looking at having really high altitude planes too, including solar powered planes that would be up, 100,000 feet or something. So all these kind of things people are still looking at. Let's see, we talked about the Korea having a failure. They originally had just solid state rockets, just solid rockets, because military heritage. That's what you want for military use. You can keep them around forever and launch them instantly. They were trying to convert over to liquid fuel, and it seems like it's the liquid fuel conversion. They're trying to use kerosene now, and like Falcon 9, and they're having trouble. It seems like.
For a long time, yeah, they use basically upgraded versions.
Well,
that's
yeah,
that's
right.
They got the technology from the Russians after 1990, and that gave them a start on how to do that stuff. And then they started branching up into the more advanced liquid rocket engine technology, that kerosene and other fuels. I'm not sure. I don't think they've ever actually tried to tackle hypergolics. Under the impression that they did something.
Well, actually,
combination.
Their upper stage may well be hydrazine of some sort or another. I mean, that's been traditional Russian and everybody else, actually. So.
I'm still thinking of the same stage, the first stage. Yeah, they're plugging away at it. They got the money. They keep putting money into it, and eventually they'll get it figured out.
Yeah. I think they may be getting more Russian help now too, more directly. So let's see.
That would be the hydrazine stage.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, wait a minute. Oh, I must have lost focus here somehow. I will just. Okay, page 2. Yeah, I highlighted that first one there. It's one of a project from the European Space Agency, and it kind of shows you how far behind they've gotten. That for their own programs, they have some kind of a satellite program. They're launching on Falcon 9s, just like everybody else has to. That Series 1, I showed you the picture of that. They can launch from sea or from land. They've done both. This particular one was a sea launch. And of course, the Russians keep doing their normal thing of taking cargo to the space station or taking crew to the space station. And they continue doing that. With all the problems in the world going on, they're still holding up their end of the bargain on the space station. Let's see.
May 29th or May 30th, Series 1.
Sorry, what?
May 29th, Series 1. May 30th, Series 1.
Yeah. Well, one was land and one was a sea launch, I guess.
Oh, okay.
So.
Wow, they turned around that boat that fast.
No, see that they do. I forgot about that's right. No, that one was definitely a land launch. So, yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. I mean, we've talked, of course, about Starliner and so on. That's pretty much it. That's
their satellites. They are mastering the architecturization because they've got 2 weather satellites, 2 laser communication test satellites. Mm-hmm. That's 5 satellites on an 800-pound
load. Yeah.
Split up an 800-pound capability. Yeah. So, that's like a 150 pounds piece or something like that.
Probably. Yeah.
Something there. Yeah. So they're obviously getting better. China's getting better, but they're shrinking their satellites. I know that for a long time that was a problem with the Russians, is that they had no domestic microelectronics investment, and so they had real problems all their payload packages tend to be large and bulky and sort of 1968 technology, because that's all they could get their hands on.
Yeah.
Now, all the microchips come from China. So,
Well, the lower technology, with the higher technology, are still coming from Taiwan. So
quantity has a quality balance.
it does.
As they do the same.
That's true. All right. Well, actually, that ends. I don't think I can stretch it out anymore unless there's questions or comments.
Greg, I think what I'd like to do is go back over the Comic Palooza pictures that I had at the beginning.
Go back to what?
The Comic Palooza.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that'd be good.
A number of us were late.
Yeah. All right.
I think, yeah. Hey, I realize it's a repeat for maybe 3 of you. I think you're on the. Oh, I can find it.
Oh, look, the Chinese launcher.
Oh, I got it. And then
yeah, it's one of these. You move that one out of the way. It's just, these were. That was probably no. Yours was it's this one up here, Nathan. I changed the title so it alphabetized. Just double click on it. It's a shortcut.
All right. Oops.
No, the icon.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to.
Wait, maybe it's still sitting around. Maybe the.
Oh, you think it's down here?
Yeah, I just go to the.
No, I had closed it. Oh,
okay.
but I could go file, and I can go open. There we go. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay.
So is your microphone back on?
It is. I think. Okay.
Yeah, there was one other thing about the SpaceX rocket coming back. Was that I was watching? It was like 22 minutes. It was like they're going through the high heat zone, and I thought that the camera had frozen. And then after about 3 minutes of this, they said, "Oh, by the way, your camera is not frozen. The data stream is not frozen. This is the actual picture being transmitted live from the spacecraft."
It was pretty amazing.
The coma, the plasma coma is very, very stable, as you can see. But if you watch very, very closely, you can see that's not the data stream going blip. Those are actual little fireflies, the things go fast, that are coming off of the ship very, very slowly or very intermittently. So yes, this is a live picture and things are happening. So again, that was just a phenomenal concept of being able to see a spaceship coming back and seeing that plasma effect live.
Yeah, it was awesome. Everybody should see the video if you can. I thought I'd go back over the Comic Palooza pictures. I thought you might like that. So I guess first of all, I want to give special recognition to Robert. So Robert, can you stand up and we'll all give you a round of applause for putting together the booth and everything. So thank you for making that happen. Really appreciate that.
Great job, Robert.
He was there from Thursday from the setup and all the way after everybody left, putting it back up. So, and definitely would not have happened without his encouragement, participation, and making a booth. But so we had a lot of pictures on the moon. We had Elvis. We had a little kid. We got aliens versus astronauts over there. So, if we don't get to the moon,
Someone else will get there.
yeah. I mean, we're a lot closer than presumably the aliens are. So we should make use of that fact. This guy was just walking by and had "not flat" on his shirt, so I was like, had to get a picture of him.
Yeah, the print says "not flat," and then in parentheses underneath it says "check."
We checked. One guy was being carried around by an alien. Luckily, there's some people, Men in Black characters, here to resolve the situation. So I'm happy to report that he's at home with his family right now. The entire Mario family. Mark Twain made an appearance, and then Captain America as well. So that was awesome. And these people were completely in character. I can't quite remember the noise that they make. It was like blow, 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 blow. But anyway, Pac-Man is going for the ultimate power pellet here, Earth. So anyway, I'm sure that'll chase away all the ghosts. He gets that. So we had lots of kids and adults and everybody. And then we give away lots of Starship models. So that was really cool to see. And hopefully that encouraged them all to pay attention whenever they heard Starship in the news this week. And it was just really a lot of fun. A lot of people participated. And it was neat to see everybody's approach in terms of how that connected. Everybody kind of connected with different people, and it was just really neat to see the variety there. And then, of course, Patricia had her, she made a crocheted little Earth, and then you can see this is Jupiter with the sunspot, the bright spot, yeah, and then Saturn, and so that was really neat too. And it's just really cool to see the excitement and everybody. And so I want to thank everybody who made it happen. So I thank you all for doing that.
Well, it was a lot of fun. I think everybody who was there commented on how much fun they were having. And I hope we did some good handing out magazines. Once people realized our magazines were free, they started moving a lot faster. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's all I had for today. So I thank you all for coming. And, oh, yes, go ahead, Michelle. Sure. So like you're talking about this? Oh, the agenda. Oh, you want to see the agenda? Oh, after this. Oops. I kind of all the yeah. Working on it. I think I got it. There we go. Yeah. Yeah. The Starship model. Send a postcard to space. Yeah. Oh, well, actually, so Blue Origin has these, the New Shepard rocket they send to space and back, and you can draw or write a message on a postcard, put your address on the other side with a stamp, and then they'll take it, send it up on their New Shepard and back, and they'll mark it as sent to space and send it to you. So. And you can, Patricia is right there, and inside the magazine, there's a postcard. Thank you, Patricia. That's awesome. Perfect timing. You have a postcard club? Yeah. Well, we'll have to give you a whole bunch of postcards. I don't think I brought any, but you could take a whole bunch of magazines and give one to each of your people, and then that'd be good. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't do really well, but well, we needed really a table of like draw and write and stuff right there in that box to put it in.
That way they have information and it has a postcard in each magazine. Oh, okay, yes. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, I think with that, we could go over to PJ's and hang out if y'all want. It's just right down the street. Oh, go ahead, Robert.
Have you made any recommendation whether anybody wants to do the infinite?
Oh, I thought we could talk about that there, but
you mentioned the 29th of June, and I didn't know if you talked to any of the other people.
I haven't talked to anybody yet. I was wanting to find out. Are y'all familiar with the Infinite? I guess is the first. You're familiar. Have y'all been?
I've been there, but
okay. I was looking at the 29th morning to do the Infinite. I didn't. It's a Saturday. Let's see, and I can show you this. The Infinite.
It's at the intersection here. Cypresswood and just a couple blocks. Yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah. Well, if you're used to using the other. Yeah. But there's a there's a strip plaza right there. It's probably gonna right on the corner. There's a strip plaza at the corner on the southwest corner of that intersection. Yeah. Jay's is right there. Corner of like a 5-story building. Yeah. And then there's a magic mushroom.
Well,
It's right across the street. Yeah, right across the street.
well, maybe we could just do this. PJ's Coffee, Scrivener Airline. So literally, it's right there, and we are right here. So we could do directions from Barbara Bush Library. There we go. And if you walked, it's only 9 minutes. That's what it says. 2 minutes to drive, 9 minutes to walk.
But they didn't factor in the water stuff. They have to make 2 stops for water on the way.
Yes, that's true.
Oh, wow. No, we're 9 minutes? Yeah.
That's what it says. Okay, well, the Infinite. Okay, so this is a VR display thing. It's like a huge warehouse. You go in, you get a VR headset. You walk around. You get to see the ISS. You get to have like these little like there's like each. It's really kind of a neat experience. About an hour long. It costs about $40 a person. And we were looking at doing maybe a group on Saturday the 29th in the early morning, not early morning, late morning, like right before lunchtime. And then we could also go to a nearby restaurant for lunch afterwards. So I didn't know if the 29th, if y'all were interested, everybody interested? Okay, June 29th. If you are, okay, and then don't know. Okay, he's welcome to come too. And it's about $40. I mean, it is exactly $40 by the time you add up the cost of the thing, the ticket fee, and the tax. It's like you get it for $32, but by the time you add all that in, it's like.
Walk around with that VR headset. It's basically like you're on the space station.
Oh, come in.
You're on the space station, and it's in 3D, and there are astronauts hanging there. And most of them are right side up, but some of them are upside down, just for fun, and they're talking to you. And they're showing, this is my experiment, this is how this works. And then you just keep walking through the station, and then there's another astronaut pop up. And then if you want to go outside the lines, you see the lines on the floor there? You can actually go outside the lines, and then you're outside the space station, and you look down, and you can see the Earth.
Once you experience space, life begins to feel a little bit more extraordinary. Because when you step beyond the ordinary, it changes you. This is life 400 kilometers above the Milky Way. Space as you've never seen it. A view once reserved for a chosen few. The experience may end, but the feeling is Space Explorers, the Infinite. Book your tickets now.
Okay, so that's that. Cool. Well, I could definitely send you more details. And but June 29th in the morning would work for most of y'all. Good. Well, it does.
Do we have to buy the tickets in advance, or do we pay at the site? Do you remember?
If we do it as a group and get the group rate, we need to buy as advance and all at once. So But that only saves us like $5 a ticket. But $5 is $5. Well, thank you all very much. That pretty much ends our meeting. If y'all wouldn't mind help me put up the chairs, and feel free to, and I'll let you take care of this. Okay, I just said that too. Oh, and I give this to you. Oh, and I have some PJ's gift cards. If, usually, on that here, I give gift card.